Welcome to Exploring Christianity, a Journey of Faith. In today's video, we'll explore the question, what's inside the Old Testament? Looking at how it's organized and doing a quick review of its best-known contents. Christians and Jews divide up the sections of the Old Testament somewhat differently. I'll be speaking about the Christian organization today, which breaks the Old Testament into the history books, the wisdom literature, also called the poetic books, and the prophets. The first 5 of the historical books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, are commonly called by a few different names, including the Law, the Torah, and the Pentateuch. These books start with the creation of, everything, and end just as the ancient Israelites are poised to enter the Promised Land. These books list over 600 commandments God gave the Israelites and contain a lot of the most recognized characters, artifacts, and stories of the Bible, including Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the Tower of Babel, Noah, Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham and Isaac, Moses in the burning bush, Moses parting the Red Sea, the 10 Commandments, and the Ark of the Covenant. The remainder of the historical books begin as the Israelites enter the Promised Land and end with the rebuilding of Jerusalem, following the Israelites' conquest and captivity by the Babylonians. These books start with the book of Joshua and continue through the book of Esther. Some key characters and stories in these books include Joshua and the walls of Jericho, Joseph and his coat of many colors, the 12 tribes of Israel, Gideon and the fleeces, Samson and Delilah, Ruth, David and Goliath, King David and Bathsheba, King Solomon, and Jonah and the whale, which I know we're supposed to now call a big fish, but whale sounds so much better. The wisdom literature makes up the second major section of the Old Testament, and it includes the books of Job, the Psalms, which are the books of poetry and songs that include the beautiful 23rd Psalm, which starts, "The Lord is my shepherd." Proverbs, the book of wisdom sayings from which we get the classics, "Pride goes before the fall," and "Spare the rod and spoil the child." Ecclesiastes, which told us before the birds that for everything there is a season. And finally, the Song of Solomon, offering marriage advice from a man with over 700 wives. The final major section of the Christian Old Testament is called the Prophets, and is divided into the 5 major or greater prophets and the 12 minor prophets. The names major and minor do not necessarily imply that the prophets themselves were more or less important, but instead reflects the relative length of the books. These books were written by God's prophets, who appear as the tribes of Israel begin to forget God and turn to the worship of the gods of their neighboring people, which began around the time of the end of King Solomon's reign. The prophets attempt unsuccessfully to turn the people back to God when they stray, but the prophets are ignored and sometimes imprisoned or even killed. God twice uses neighboring powers to conquer the Israelites and put them in captivity until they repent and return. In the coming weeks, we'll examine the major events in the histories described in the Old Testament in more detail and witness the repeated cycle of return to God and rebellion from God that many of us continue to experience in our own lives even today. So, what are your favorite stories from the Old Testament?